Welcome to the Disney Parks Podcast, your Disney infotainment podcast. Keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the podcast at all times and get ready for the Disney Parks Podcast.
All right. Hey, welcome, everybody. We have a fun, fascinating, interesting person on our show. Jerry Rees.
Quite a review.
Is a visionary director, animator, writer, producer, and so much more. He's done lots of work with Disney classics, groundbreaking entertainment experiences. Jerry's animated one of my favorites and probably one of yours, The Brave Little Toaster, cult classic, right? Contributed to films like Tron, The Fox and the Hound, Black Cauldron, and brought many attractions to life in many parks. We are going to talk about all that and so much more on today's show. So
we'll be on
to the show.
5 hours.
Yeah. Let's start with when you were born.
Oh, okay. Going back to Texas now.
No, but the first question we'd love to ask everybody is, how did your journey with Disney begin?
Wow. Well, gosh, it was a really interesting one for me. Like a lot of people can relate to this, watching the Wonderful World of Color, the Disney show,
right,
on the weekend. And my family, it was a family event. We'd tune around and watch, and Walt would tell us what was next, and I'd always see Tinkerbell, right, flashing in the next thing. So I just fell in love with the whole Disney thing. But to me, it was like the far side of the moon to be anywhere near there. I was in a little tiny community. We had nothing to do with the game at all. So I started, doing my best to try to learn to draw. I would go to like the Gulf Oil magazine. I don't know if you were old enough to remember that they used to put out the Disney magazine from the Gulf Oil company. Okay. So I would practice drawing from that. I talked people in the local community into letting me rent some Disney short films to show at youth events that would happen once a week. So I would look through, and it was called Disney Cartoon Parades that were available for rent from their library. So it was Mickey and Donald and Goofy, and occasionally something like Willie the Operatic Whale, or like the dinosaur sequence from Fantasia, but it was not full featured. And I also just had this visceral, so I was falling in love with it more and more and trying to do my best. And then I remember, my family driving home from my aunt and uncle's house, and we go over an overpass, and I see this drive-in movie screen that's huge. We're eye level with it. And it's the whale chase scene from Pinocchio. Oh, wow. And I talked my dad, and please pull over to the side. So he pulls over momentarily, and we watch part of that until Pinocchio winds up face down in the water, drowned. And so I go, please, can we go watch the next show? So we went around and watched late that night, and it was the first time I had seen on the big screen like a serious feature like that. And the artistry of it blew me away. So I started digging deeper and trying to do it. And I ordered like animation paper from the Acme company. My dad helped me build a multiplane setup at home. So we had multiple layers of glass, and I asked for a north, south, east, west crank. And I didn't have any numbers, but I would do my best with a little tripod. And so I'm going through all of that, and there was a pivotal moment. And so all this stuff is leading to like a moment. I go into the local medical center, had in Loma Linda Medical University, had an audiovisual department. And my family couldn't afford to buy pre-hole punched paper. And so we found like a paper mill where you could just get paper cut to the right size and go. I found out that I could go there and get an industrial hole punch to punch my paper. And somebody just did me the favor. It's like, sure, kid, you can come in the side door, and just when we're not using it, you can punch your paper. Saved us enough money that I could continue to experiment. Well, the manager of that department caught me. And it's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, you're not supposed to be here. So I explained what I was doing, animation, and he just goes, you can't do that. You need an Oxbury camera stand. You need this. He lists all the reasons why I couldn't do it. So I sort of sheepishly take my stack of paper, what I had punched, and I head out the side door. And my mom had been watching from the door. And so we got back in the car, and she told me years later, I don't remember this from the time, but she was kind of worried. It was a big dream of mine, and I had this adult professional say, "You can't do that."
Right.
And she said, how do you feel about that? And I said, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about." At least that's what she told me that I said
Right.
later. So I was glad I had the confidence. Anyway, he caught me again. I had the the chutzpah to go back and try to punch some more paper. So now he's like, "Okay, what are you doing?" And I said, "Look, I know I need an Oxbury stand, but I put weights on my little tripod, and I put a tape across the living room to let my family know it's a hot set." And he's like, "Okay, let me see." So I bring in a little projector, and I project on a piece of cardboard my attempts at animation. And boy, did his tune change. He was like, "Did you do that?" And I showed him, among the different things I showed him was I was trying to do like the penguins dancing from Mary Poppins. And so he's like, "You didn't trace that? That's yours?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he goes from "you can't do that" to pulling out a piece of paper and wrote a phone number down, ripped it off and handed it to me. And he said, "I went to this lecture. Some people from Disney were there, and they mentioned that the veterans that have been around since Walt are getting near retirement, and they're thinking, gee, they've got to start mentoring some young people to keep the animation department alive." So this is the phone number to the production manager of the Disney feature animation department, if you're interested. Right. So that to me was like, that was the most life-changing moment, where I went from having no idea. It was just the magic of Disney, the big parks that, Walt on the TV, and no idea of how to. And there was a phone number, and I called it, and I was just 16, and Ed Hansen, who was the production manager of the Disney feature animation, picked up. And I stumbled through my story, and he goes, "Well, we'll have your mom or dad drive you down, and we'll take a look at your stuff." So I did, and they had my dad wait in the sort of the lobby, and they took me to meet Eric Larson, who was one of Walt's 9 old men. And Eric looked through my portfolio and watched my stuff, and he said, "Well, so you're a junior in high school, this will be your desk. So whenever you have a break from high school, come on in, and I'll give you some pointers." And it's like, so I went suddenly to having a desk waiting for me anytime I had a break in high school. And it was just astounding. And so I did the junior and senior year of high school with doing trips as much as I could, and much more during the summer. And then they let me know, we're going to start this new thing called the CalArts Character Animation Program. Right. And how would you like to be teacher's assistant for year one? And I said, "Oh my God, that would be amazing, but my family can't afford something like that." And they said, "Well, scholarships, we'll pay for it." So as soon as I graduated, I just was spending all my time during the summer between that and the first year of CalArts Character Animation Program in '75, just preparing everything. Getting scenes out of the morgue and asking for sections to be, and they call it the morgue. I'm sorry about that. That was the term for the Disney Archives. Right. But I could pull out scenes and say, "Could you please copy this scene where Jiminy Cricket is trying to catch up with Pinocchio, and he's putting his coat on, and Milt Call animated, and it's amazing. And if we had copies of that for flipping drawings for my fellow students, it would be amazing." So that kind of stuff, prepping everything. And then taking phone calls. So I was talked to John Musker for the first time on the phone. I was in Jack Hanna's office at the studio, taking calls from my future fellow students. And, Brad Bird, is that spelled with an I or a Y? And so we all got to know each other, and we went out and did the guinea pig year of CalArts. And then my exact trip into Disney was 2 years of the CalArts program. After 2 years, they drafted 4 of us to drop out of college and start animating full time. So it was me, and Brad Bird, and John Musker, and Doug Leffler, and they grabbed Henry Selick out of the experimental animation program at the same time. So I have told my kids, well, I was a college dropout, but I'm not vouching for being a college dropout.
Right.
So that landed me at Disney. So they were finishing up Pete's Dragon at the time. So my first job on, there with a paycheck was doing final cleanup on combination scenes where,
Wow.
LA was in scenes with the live action.
Yeah.
So
what
there
was
we are.
like?
That's a long story.
Yeah. What was CalArts like? I mean, all right. So this is year one of the whole CalArts program, and now everybody that tries to get into animation or storytelling or whatever, tries to get into CalArts. So, being that you were in the ground floor of this whole experience, um, where do like, I have many questions about it, but like, what was that program like then, and is it different now? Has it evolved?
Oh, it's evolved immensely over the
Yeah.
years. At the time, we had people like Ken O'Connor, who was a teacher.
Right.
Bill Moore was an amazing teacher. And, Bill Moore, our design teacher, I've compared notes with people since. And no matter what people went into, they felt like Bill Moore's principles of design and the passion and sort of a mixture of anarchy and passion that he used to teach
Right.
us, and fear and intimidation plus praise,
Yeah.
just fundamentally left an impact on us going forward. But it was we were tiny,
Yeah.
and we were seen as kind of the outcasts. We were actually seen as like the sellouts of CalArts at the time, because
Yeah.
everybody else in the school took great pride in not being commercial,
Yeah.
being experimental.
Right.
And they looked at our little group with Jack Hanna, who was, a shorts director primarily,
Yeah.
and that we were training to have jobs at Disney. They're like,
Right.
well, sellouts. So they really were snooty to us.
Yeah.
And so we kind of felt that we were just like a dozen people. And so we felt a real kind of togetherness and kind of being shunned by the rest of the school, and would hang out a lot together and really work hard. And so many of us had been at it for years that a lot of us wished we could push past what, especially in the animation class itself under Jack Hanna, that the other people like, Bill Moore and Ken O'Connor and Teehee and, they were just pushing us, challenging us. But we felt like Jack was more like, well, start with a little cocky little walk with the duck or whatever. And most of us had been animating on our own for some time before we came into that class. Like I did, just started, in my early teens, and finally connected with Disney in my, mid to late teens. So we wished we could do more. So a lot of the time we would kind of do our own assignment for what to do, and push for more. And it kind of tripped me and Brad Bird up in the first year, because we were both really into filmmaking in addition to animation, and would go together to see, Spielberg films and Coppola and Lucas. And so we teamed up to do our first year student film as a co-film. So it's like we would make it, get more characters in, like a whole film. And we were proceeding with that during a good deal of the year. And then Jack got wind of it later on as we were near the finale, and she said, no, you can't do that. No, it has to be your own, and get rid of all of that. So I felt horrible that at the end of the first year, I wound up having to scramble and just animate something simple. I think I chose Brer Rabbit and did a couple little bounces. And so here these people had been mentoring me. Eric had been like mentoring me for several years at that point. And at the end of the first year, it looks like I do a couple of seconds of the bouncing Brer Rabbit, and that's it. So Brad and I both kind of really learned in year two, it's like, okay, focus on your own thing.
Yeah.
Don't try to team up. And so at the end of that second year, we were lucky to be zipped over there. And then we, continuing with wonderful people like Tim Burton and Joe Rampton, a bunch of people that came in that did, and Lasseter, that completed the 4 years, and then would come by. But I heard from people like Rob Minkoff, who's a dear friend, that I didn't realize that he said that they had really felt the door close at Disney after for several years. And, it's a whole other part of the story, but after several years went by, Brad Bird and I were trying to get an animated feature up and running with Gary Kurtz, who was the producer on Star Wars Empire,
Right.
Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And Rob Minkoff said back at CalArts they were hoping that would go, because they said, well, Disney's kind of full up. They're not hiring anymore. But if Brad and Jerry get that thing going with Gary Kurtz, that could be a feature we could jump onto. And the dream was to really pursue the storytelling, the illusion of life and characters and things that we learned under Walt's mentors, but try to be more aggressively proactive in pushing it into new cinema. It's like if it wasn't going to happen inside the Disney walls yet, we wanted to just not wait for a decade. We wanted to just do it now. And so that was part of our dream. And I just found out when Annie Leibovitz did a photo shoot of the A113 class that first year, plus other students that came through that class. When we were there at the photo shoot, and all of us kind of amazed that we were on that end of Annie Leibovitz's camera lens. We all had her books and we were looking from the other side, but we didn't know she'd be pointing her cameras at us. But that evening, Rob Minkoff told me, he said, we had been kind of seeing what you and Brad were trying to start as kind of a lighthouse of hope when we felt like Disney had kind of closed the doors for a while at that point.
Yeah. And, so you got mentored by a 9 old man who, these were, they're legends in Disney animation. And then somebody like Jack Hanna, that's the other half of my childhood is Hanna-Barbera and Disney. Was there a difference the way, somebody at Disney, one of the 9 old men, would approach something compared to Jack's way to approach something?
Well, actually, Jack Hanna had the same last name, but he was inside of Disney. So something like Lambert the Sheepish Lion, which was a short from Disney, was directed by Jack Hanna. So he had done some of the Donald shorts and other things, but he was more focused on the Disney shorts. Okay. But I felt like there was a distinction. I felt like Eric and Frank and Ollie and Milt and Ward Kimball, I was more in the mix with them. In fact, when I was first there, Frank and Ollie and Eric and Milt were still animating. They were still at the desk working. They hadn't started their book and retired yet. And they
Which is a great book.
Yes. The Illusion of Life.
Yeah.
They had this passion for really digging deep into emotion, sort of fearlessly, and like all of them, and really getting into the acting and individuality of each character. I don't know if it was just because Jack Hanna felt like he was dealing with students that weren't ready for that, but I didn't feel, and my classmates at the time, we didn't feel near as much of pushing into that zone from Jack Hanna as we felt in-house at Disney with the veterans, and we longed for that. So that was one of the reasons we did the push to do our own film. And in fact, there was this incident that happened once Brad and I were out there and it started our first year together and really were collaborating. We went back to visit the studio lot again, and Brad had been going there while I was going to see Eric. He was going there to drop in on Milk Call, which was amazing. So we both had our mentors, and I'd had more sort of the summertime and high school break time. But Brad and I are there, and we're walking through the hallways, and we see Frank and Ollie, who are still animating on Rescuers.
Yeah.
They wave us, "Hey, Brad, Jerry, you want to come see something?" And we're like, "Yes." So we go down to their room, and it was we so related to it. They showed us on the moviola in their room a sequence they were working on with Penny, and she was down in the caves, and the ocean water is rushing in, and Medusa's wanting her to get the diamond, and they started it for us. It was in pencil test form, and they turned the lights out so we could really just pay attention to the film. And there was a moment where Penny gets swept down by the tide and sucked down the hole and goes out of view, and the last bubbles come up. And you're just waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting. And Brad and I are like, "Oh my God." And then like, she comes up out and is gasping for air and stuff. And it was like heart-pounding drama.
Yeah.
And anyway, Frank and Ollie were enjoying us getting wrapped up in it that much, and they turned the light on, and they go, and we're like, oh my gosh, guys, that's amazing! Congratulations! Like, you have me right there with your most powerful work ever. And they said, well, you're probably the last two people that are going to see it, because Wooly wants us to tone it down. He said it's too scary, and we're like, what? It's like, oh my God! And we start, citing scene after scene that they worked on in the classic features. We're like, Pinocchio wasn't just like gasping for breath. He was drowned. He was face down. And it's like,
Right.
So we're going through all these things, and they said, well, don't tell us, tell Wooly. And we like, we will. So they picked up the phone, and they sent us, they said, hey, Brad and Jerry want to talk to you. They sent us up to plead their case with Wooly Reitherman.
Wow.
So here they were, veterans, the 9 old men.
Yeah.
They're being censored.
Yeah.
They're being told, tone it down, don't make it so dramatic. People will write letters. It's for little kids. And they're like, well, we never did it for little kids before. We did it for the whole family. Yeah. So we had a peek into the state of things through their experience. So, when Brad and I were pushing to make our own film and push further than the teacher was doing, it was like Frank and Ollie were doing that. They were like, they were getting together and pushing further than Wooly wanted them to go. And so we felt very much like they were setting a permission structure for us to be adventurous and dynamic and push beyond just the instruction in front of you. Right. And Eric was that way too. Eric really, in fact, Eric had me give a lecture to my peers there at one point, and he attended and came to the theater. But it was kind of, it really was saying, we have to push further, and we have to, even if it means going against what we've been told, we need to explore. So Eric had been saying, for example, observe from life and bring life into your filmmaking. Yeah. And so I started doing that. And on Fox and the Hound, there were the two little birds, Dinky and Boomer. So I started looking around in real life, and I brought that into my work. I was at the commissary at Disney, and there were little birds hopping around, and I was like, gosh, they're so quick, and they'll do like 2, 3, 4 poses in a second, but I'm not confused. My brain can completely process that, but we've been told in animation, you can't do that. You have to do it very, like, have your eye follow it simply and all that. So I tried breaking the rules by following what Eric said, like, just look at nature, draw that into your work. So 2 things happened. The directors on the Fox and the Hound, were charmed by it and delighted by it. And actually, Neil O'Brien sent me who just put out the book recently, the After Disney. He sent me an article he found a decade later where Ted Berman talked about my animation. That to him, it was a startling change. Okay, so that was one. Right. The second thing that happened is they flipped through my drawings and went, oh, no, you can't do that. No, that doesn't belong in a feature. So they were delighted on the screen, and then immediately started censoring my work frame by frame. Wow. Which is what it took to achieve that on the screen. Yeah. So we actually developed a thing where we would hide what they considered the not allowed artwork. We would take it out of the stack of drawings, send it for them to approve, reinsert it, send it through ink and paint and to camera, and they loved what they saw on the screen. Yeah. So Eric was sad that we had to be clandestine about it.
Yeah, sure.
Eric hoped that we would but he wanted us to keep fighting. So he had me come up and give a talk about, like, do whatever it takes. Right. Follow the veterans' advice, get your observations in. So I showed not to be obstinate, but to have people be observant. Eric took me to a screening room where it had a little dowser on the projector, so that you could go frame by frame back in the days when it was not video, it was film with light, and not burn the film. It would have a dowser came down that did sort of diffuse the heat and the light. Right. So it was dimmer, but you could see it. Yeah. And so I showed them, I said, so here's a bird. Now you'll see the bird is going to take off. Now it won't do the pretty little moves. Right. Yet standing there, and in one frame it moves a little bit, and then it's a blur, and it looks like it has 20 wings with feathers that are exploding, and then it's gone. Right. And that's not a cartoon. That's a real bird in nature with a real camera. Now
Right.
we're being told that that's too cartoony, but tell
Right.
that to the bird. That's a real bird with flesh and blood.
Yeah.
So, so Eric liked the fact he was sort of jingling his keys and chuckling in the back of the room. He wanted to sort of lead
Yeah.
the charge towards keep observing, keep exploring, keep being
Right.
adventurous. Don't let the censors calm you down.
Right.
So all of that force was going on at the studio, where there was the sort of the censorship and toning down force, but then there were the veterans who were total soulmates with us as the incoming young
Mm.
people, who all wanted to just break out of the box and keep exploring and keep being dynamic.
Right. Right. What was the uh what was the first Disney project you worked on?
The very first one was Pete's Dragon,
Okay. Okay.
because
And what
that was in the crunch when they hired me out of. They took the four of us into Disney out of CalArts. They
mm,
were in final crunch, and they knew that I had between while I was in school, I had actually done cleanup for Don Bluth's film, the Banjo the Woodpile Cat. So he
oh,
was getting volunteers to work on it. And I told John Gary and John Pomeroy and Gary and Don Bluth,
right.
I told them I can't be one of these volunteers that just does it for free. I'm moving out of my home for the first time. I need to rent
Yeah.
an apartment. So they paid me to do cleanup on Banjo. So I had done that while I was between college, first and second college years, to keep my craft going and to make some
Right.
money. So as I came into Disney and they were in final cleanup crunch on Pete's Dragon, they're like, "Oh, we know Jerry can do cleanup." So like,
Yep.
draft him into that. So even though my dream was to be an animator, I jumped into cleanup, and I enjoyed doing that because I felt like it was cleanup well done
Hmm.
can protect what an animator had in mind,
Right.
or in some cases, well done might enhance it slightly,
Hmm.
but cleanup poorly done can completely ruin what an animator had in mind and take nuance and sparkle out. So I felt
Yeah.
like a sense of guardianship and responsibility to say, well, I'm following up the animator on this with cleanup, but I have to really keep my animator's hat on to make sure that I don't lose anything.
Right. Right. How did you get to directing then the Brave Little Toaster? How did that wind up in your hands?
Well, the quick thing is Pete's Dragon, then the small one,
Okay.
featurette, then the Fox and the Hound. Then I
Okay.
jumped on to Tron, and I was the only person from the animation department that jumped onto that from in-house.
Right.
There are a lot of people going, "Oh, push button killer art." It's like, how dare you do computers? It will never emote.
Yeah.
But bravely went on to that, and then right off of Tron, Gary Kurtz loved the film promo that Brad Bird and I had put together for our Dream project. He really pushed deeply into
Hmm.
strong cinematic filmmaking and Disney character animation. Was with what was The Spirit was the
Okay.
feature. It was based on Will Eisner's comic strip, and Brad and I had a dream of adapting that. Gary Kurtz understood what we were doing,
Hmm.
that he saw that as fitting his canon of work. So American Graffiti, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and our animated feature, The Spirit. He went, it
Wow.
fits. It's dynamic, big cinema that reaches the whole family.
Yeah.
It's not aimed at one demographic. And he had seen our pre-visualization and had read drafts of the script and felt like it belonged. So he was our angel investor,
Hmm.
and for a couple of years kept us afloat. But he ultimately could not find the funding for that because we kept hitting a wall.
Yeah.
Because people would read the screenplay and go, hell yeah, it's like Gary Kurtz producing and this screenplay, count us in. And then they'd
Right.
find out it was animated and they go, it's animated. Animation is for kindergarten. That's for children. And we're like,
Yeah.
no, not this one.
Yeah.
It's like,
Right.
and so we kept hitting that wall, and Gary kept trying to do his best. And after a couple of years, he was facing through many forces in his life, dealing with a potential bankruptcy. So Brad and I both stepped out of that situation on good terms with Gary and said, look, you could do with one less check to write every week.
Right.
Um, if the funding ever comes together, we're back on this. But we stepped out. As soon as I stepped out of that, I get the call and I had moved up north. I was living in Marin County, where Gary Kurtz's offices were for in that time, 80, 81, 82, 83. So, or 82, 82, 83, 84. And but as soon as I stepped out of the situation, resigned on good terms with Gary, I get a call from Tom Willhite back at the studio. And he says, Jerry, you got to fly down. You got to fly down to LA and meet with me. So he told me the story. He said there was going to be this, this novella, Thomas Desch's The Brave Little Toaster. It's a novella, and John Lasseter was hoping to develop it in-house at Disney. Right. He had come and was very curious when I was doing Tron. So he was one of the few people, like he and Brad and some different people would come in where Bill Croyer and I were the only two computer image choreographers on the whole film. Wow. And so they were like, wow, this computer stuff looks really interesting. So Lasseter's hope was to help jump into computers for characters and storytelling, and to use The Brave Little Toaster as the vehicle to do that. Yeah. He had also gotten into, I don't know what exactly had happened, but there were some scuffles that had happened politically, and so he got fired and the project was unplugged. And so Tom Willhite told me over lunch, he handed me the novella, here you go, and said, people are telling me, so he says, I've got the rights to it now, and I'm taking it out of Disney, and I want to do it independently. And, Lasseter was on it, and Brian McAtee was on it, Ramp was on it, they were the starting team. But he said, I really feel like so many people look at it as a charming short film. They read the book and go, that's what it should be. Yeah. I don't think it's a feature. But he said, I believe it could be a feature in the right hands, and I think you're the person to develop the feature. Yeah. So he said, can you read it? He said, there's some development art that's up. Take a look at anything that you think is useful. But he said, I know you're dying to do stuff. I know you and Brad and Gary Kurtz were trying to get the Spirit making it done. And you've just got this, you're starved to do something that's your own. Yeah. So he said, I don't have much money to give you, but I can give you that dream, because what I need is somebody to develop this, because it's not ready for a feature, and then write it and then direct it. And I can have you do all those things. And so I can give you that. I can't give you hardly any money, but I can give you that. Yeah. So I agreed, and immediately, it was funny. I was talking to my wife Rebecca about it. I met her at Disney. She wound up being one of the directing animators on the Brave Little Toaster. But when she first heard the title, she was like, "What are you doing? This is like a kindergarten movie. You were just trying to get the Spirit made in like film noir, big cinema, and now this kiddie film." And I said, "Well, we won't make it a kiddie film. We'll just make it a film. It's a film for us." And so, Donald Kushner, who was on Tron, and Tom Willhite, the two of them took us out into a completely independent zone, and boy, were they true to the promise. It's like I didn't have any notes. It was completely independent. And so that whole thing of just having an impulse and doing it suddenly came into play. And it's like I think about what would have happened if Frank and Ollie had been given that freedom back when they had the to do the scene the way they wanted to. So I was with a whole little team, and some of them were just fresh out of college, but we were all together, and I was given the steering wheel, and I was given full permission to just keep charging ahead. And so many people contributed so much to that. And it was so fun to be able to bring in a group of collaborative artists and really value what each one would give to it. Yeah. It's not like, I have X number of certain types of animators. It's like, no, there's Joe and Brian and Rebecca and Randy, and like each one has a certain charming, wonderful thing to give. And I want all of that to be in. So it was like a very specific target that I set for people, but it was, what can you think up to contribute to make it better today? And so it's like, it was very much a handcuffs off kind of situation where everybody really felt the freedom to create. And so that was a gift. I loved the fact that came along. It was kind of a lifesaver, psychologically and creatively, for a lot of us that time, and was kind of a breakthrough in some ways. It kept happening because I wound up going to the Groundlings Improv Theater Group for most of the voice talent, and later that was commonplace, but not at the time. And to have genuine emotion built by people who were great at improvisational comedy, and could respect a script, but add when there was time to improvise and add, could just totally jump in and be natural with it, was great. And then later I got to suggest the casting and advocate for it, and then got to work with Robin Williams. And and felt right at home because I had loved working with people that had those kind of skills. And so that led to him being cast in Aladdin. So there were some dominoes that, to me, started in Toaster and went through Back to Neverland and landed in Aladdin, and kept going. So
it was a big deal. I mean, I was working in a video store at the time, and it was probably one of the first like Disney films that we got like a bazillion cases of, and I was like, why are they sending us like 10, 12 cases of this one movie? Like, are they expecting this thing to fly off the shelves? And it did. And I was like,
which film?
A Brave Little Toaster.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
I didn't
it was like, because back then it was it was the Vault thing. Movie came out like Snow White, and we had it for a little while, and then away for 7 years, and so this was like not. I don't remember it being in the theaters. Maybe I'm wrong. But I remember just getting a ton of them.
No, it was a heartbreaking thing for me and the rest of the crew. I think
it was direct to video, right?
I had made it to be in the theaters. That was the intention. And there were a number of investors that had invested smaller amounts. Disney was one of them, Disney Cable, and they had invested to get rights put on the Disney Channel and home video. But they had no theatrical rights, and our intention was to have a full theatrical run first. I showed it at Sundance Film Festival. I was approached by a couple of the judges, and they said, "We feel like you have the best movie here this year, but if we give the top prize to a cartoon, we don't think people will take the festival seriously." So
what kind of thinking is that?
When you don't get the prize, just so you know, behind closed doors, we think you have the best film here. So it's like, oh, well, I guess thank you. And then I met somebody who's still my wonderful lawyer representative at the Sundance Festival that year, Peter Nichols. He approached me and said, "Wow, I loved your film. Do you need a lawyer?" And I went, "Yes, I do," because there's this tumult that I suddenly heard happening where just when we were booked at Sundance and we're going to go out and screen, Disney Channel moved up their date for release sooner. And so I'm like, well, that kind of kills our possible theatrical. And I actually had a one-on-one conversation with Katzenberg over that.
Oh, wow.
He's like, "Yeah, good luck, kid. We're not standing in your way." And I went, "You kind of are, right? Standing right into my way." Because if you move the date up, it kills my theatrical. So so I told my lawyer, I could use some help, because at Sundance, also in the mix, in addition to getting that word from the judges, I was approached by Skouras Films, and they did art house releases. And they said, "Man, this is not a kid's film. This is a college and young adult film. Forget matinees. We'll just put it in our art houses all over the country." So I went, thank you, you get it. So Peter Nichols went to talk with the Skouras people, and then to talk with the Disney people and go, "Can you guys make peace?" And Disney Channel, instead of moving it up to try to snuff it out, like, "It'll be worth more for you in the long run if you take longer and let the theatrical run happen. It'll increase the value, and then have your home video." And they refused. So he came back to me and said, "I don't know. They're devaluing their end of it by putting it on before the theatrical." But I thought about it later, and it was, we were getting, and I have them on my website, which is dreadfully out of date, but there was a stack of just reviews that you would dream of. I don't think I've ever gotten reviews that good since, but it was a stack of, and it would say smarter and wittier than anything coming from Disney. And, they still proves you can make it like they used to. And all this sort of praise that was competitors with Disney at the time. And we were all,
Right.
Disney trained, Disney heart, Disney mentors trained us.
Yeah.
But business-wise, we were competitors getting good reviews. And as soon as they snuffed out the theatrical and just had people think it was they called it Disney Discovery.
Yeah.
So it was a channel and home video. When people thought it came out at Disney, then suddenly all of those reviews belonged to Disney. There were good reviews for Disney. And so it was actually a pretty good chess move. And, the weird thing is, since then, I've done so many projects and had a delightful time with my friends at Disney that were before and after that conflict, and the 22 theme park attractions to date since then. So we definitely have ways to move past those kind of skirmishes that I think mainly have a business origin in the skirmish.
Right.
But yeah, it was supposed to be theatrical, and
Yeah.
so I composed everything for 185
Mhm.
first, and then moved the composition beyond that to accommodate the square format for home video. And at this point, everybody's only seen it in the square format, but hopefully someday, and there's reason to be hopeful, people will be able to see it both ways.
Yeah. I mean, AMC Theater does, their little noir films. You should, approach AMC and say, "Hey, can we do a, little special weekend blowout of the Brave Little?" You'd be surprised, Jerry, how
Oh
many
well,
people would show up.
I don't have any control over the rights. They're split a
That,
thousand ways.
yeah,
So I'm completely outside. Sadly,
yeah,
I would
yeah,
love to be in the mix, but I won't give away too much. But there's a dedicated group of fans who are amazing,
yeah,
who have really been digging into this and have made serious progress in potential amazing restoration and potential
good,
release. A lot of different parties that could affect it that seem to be all in a
yeah,
copacetic state where they all could find something positive from that. So I have found through their effort,
hmm
and I thank them right
yeah,
now. They know
yeah,
who they are,
yeah.
for making the effort. So it could happen beyond
Okay,
just a festival thing. It could be an actual release and restoration and streaming and digital and a whole bunch of.
I'm gonna keep my eyes open. I'm waiting.
Yeah, me
I'm waiting.
too.
I'm waiting.
I thought
I'll
it was
see you there.
just a dream until recently. So
Yeah, that's good. Is there a Disney character or story that you wish you could have had your hand in, or maybe change a character or change a story, something that like something you go, oh, I would have loved to have tried that or done that or worked on that character or brought this story to life or something like that. Anything that's kind of slipped through your hands that maybe you'll be able to get back to someday, or
well, I mean, something that slipped through our hands that we were absolutely in love with was the spirit.
yeah,
Um, I mean, all of it. And the thing is, Glenn Keane helped, John Musker helped,
yeah,
Daryl Rooney helped, Harry Sabin, who's sadly no longer with us, helped.
yeah,
Uh, there were so many people that helped us out with the spirit,
yeah,
and to try to prep it, and we're behind the scenes, and so even though it sounds very indie, um, the fact that the whole Star Wars universe
yeah,
is part of Disney now anyway, and Marvel. But
yeah,
there was a big contingent of us that were totally Disney trained, and we're trying, frankly, to keep the Disney flame alive
right,
with that. In fact, there was a direct comparison when we came in and we saw Black Cauldron as when we first entered, as a possible way to do that
yeah,
big cinema,
right,
serious, have it measure up to Coppola, Spielberg, Lucas. As we saw it get closer to production, and we saw things like Frank and Ollie get shot down for doing something too dramatic, and our
mhm,
own work get shot down for being too innovative, and for Gary being receptive to all of that and getting what we
right,
were doing. we really shifted our focus away from Black Cauldron to the Spirit. So I guess the answer I would give you is I still wish the Spirit could have happened, and I think it would be amazing now. But all of us were ready to do, I think, what the world is absolutely ready for now, but we were ready to do that in like 83.
Yeah.
In 81, we were ready to do that.
Right.
And I think the world would have totally accepted it back then. I think it would have been startling in the way that Star Wars was startling. But so I would still love to see that happen. And I kind of felt like the Black Cauldron, if it had been what so many of us hoped it could have been, that we thought it could have been the sort of the Star Wars moment inside of Disney, and it fell, in my opinion, far away from that. It had a lot of great hope in the beginning, and gosh, Mel Shaw's inspirational sketches were just amazing. Yeah. But we felt like it fell into the the in-between zone where it didn't commit to the dynamic thing it was meant to be, in our opinions. And we saw the Spirit as the alternative to that. Yeah. And so I wish the Spirit would happen, and I wish we could have magic wand done the Black Cauldron as we had envisioned it in those early days.
Yeah. You mentioned Robin Williams. Talk about creating the Neverland short with Robin Williams and the complete polar opposite, Walter Cronkite. I mean, those two things you don't say in the same sentence without laughing, going, "Oh, it's a Walter Cronkite, Robin Williams short."
Yes.
So tell us, because this was for a defunct attraction at Walt Disney World.
Well, it was actually for the grand opening of the Disney MGM Studios. So they were going to open for the first time this animation studio,
right?
And they had a whole park to open. So back to Neverland, and I'll tell you in a moment how that came to be. But that was the first thing that I did for the new park. And Eisner and Katzenberg really had a lot of self-consciousness about it because it was going to be the first park to open that had their names on it. It's like here's Michael and Jeffrey Park. Yeah. So they really had a lot of investment in having it work.
Yeah.
So once I had turned around back to Neverland into what it became, it's on a whole different trajectory, and I'll talk about that. But Katzenberg saw that and went, "Oh, let's have you do a second one and a third one." And so on opening day, I actually was getting 4 projects finished at the same time for opening day of that park.
Wow.
So it was one of the craziest schedule life events I've ever had.
Yeah.
But it was exciting, and it was for to have the opening of a park, to have 4 shows opening on day one was kind of a wonderful experience. There was a lot of you always dream of that moment when the audience is going to get to experience the magic, and you hope they'll feel it. And to have it happen in four times at the same day was rather. But yeah, that I had finished with Toaster, Brave Little Toaster, and had gone through the heartbreak of the theatrical not happening.
Yeah.
And I got a call from Mark Kirkland, who was line producing at Bob Rogers and Company for what was going to be a film to go in that animation building. And so Mark says, and we knew each other from earlier, from CalArts and different things. And he said, I like your storytelling sense. We've been at this for a long time. We've got 2 versions that are well developed. And we've actually had Frank and Ollie come over from the studio to put in their 2 cents. But it's just, Bob and I are talking, and we just feel like the wind is kind of going out of the sails. And we don't want that to happen. We want this to be great. And I like your storytelling sense. And if we could use fresh eyes, like nothing about this, and just to see it cold, maybe it'll give you the right impression of what we need to do. And I had just done that thing where I had turned around the Brave Little Toaster for Tom, where he's like, people tell me it could be a short. I think you can make it a feature. Right. And then, so he felt like you've shown an ability to kind of re-envision things. So maybe we need that moment. So I came back and looked at what they had, and they had showed me 2 things. It was a Siskel and Ebert version of the show, They were reviewers at the time, and they would have like walking across giant cells and talking about how many frames per second, and if you stacked up features worth of cells, they would go this high and all of that stuff. And it was charmingly done. And they had a Carol Burnett and Donald Duck version where she goes in the studio, and much like Walt Disney, where you would be in a studio and there would be an animated character appear. There was that version as well. So they had both of them quite developed, a lot of storyboards, a lot of show and tell. And so they presented both of them to me. And just my honest, and their whole thing was just, can you come give an opinion?
Yeah.
This was not a job interview at all. And so I was completely honest, because it was like a drive-by opinion. It's like, come in, take a look, fresh eyes, tell us what you think. So I said, honestly, as much hard work that's gone into these and a lot of cleverness, I don't feel like either one of them get at the core story that I feel like we were taught by our mentors.
Yeah.
That it's not about all that technical stuff. It's not how many frames per second or how high the stack of cells are or any of that. It's every department is the story department. You don't pick a color just because you think it's pretty. What does that color say about the emotion of what the character's feeling right now in this moment in the story?
Right.
Then you do that with the props in the background. You do that with the architecture in the room. You do it with the lighting. You do it with the behavior of the character. Every single department is the story department. And so I came up with this phrase. I said, it's not how you move the drawings, it's how the drawings move the audience. And Bob's like, ooh, he wrote that down, pins it up. That's kind of good. So I just said, if I were you, I would prove the emotion constantly. I would make this as a proof of emotion. And to do that, I think you need to take somebody into that world and have them feel everything. So I would take somebody like Robin Williams, have him go do the voice, get turned into a cartoon character, and have them explain that, this kind of color will make you feel happy. Oh, I feel the color. And, this will make you feel scared. Oh, I don't know what's happening now, and just get into all the different flow of how you use all these artistic tools to craft emotion. And so anyway, we get together the next morning. So they said, well, let's get together again. And they said, all very interesting stuff. Let's meet in the morning. So I had written a whole write-up, and I had written, like, you cast Robin Williams, do it for this purpose, have the story, like, laid out a whole approach. So I go back in the next morning, and I start to pull it out, and Bob's like, no, leave the paper in the envelope. We get it. And he said, I think that idea of the kid in the candy store with Robin is really good. And he said, you always have a straight man. Yeah. Don't you think Cronkite would be a great straight man? And I said, yeah, I think he'd be a great straight man. Are you kidding? And then I started going like, Walt Disney, Walt Cronkite, and also the way they talked. It's like, Walt Cronkite and Walt Disney had a very similar, charming storyteller spinner thing that they do. And so I said, that'd be great.
He had a very specific cadence in his speaking.
Mr. Cronkite. So Bob then shocks me, and George Victor, who was a producer there, and Mark Kirkland, they call while I'm there and talk to a voice that starts kind of screaming on the other end by what they said, because he's like, the two versions of the story we've been doing so far, and I'm here, it's like, well, we're thinking of like throwing those out completely and doing this whole different thing, and like, well, Jerry Rees, and it's like the voice on the other side doesn't know who the hell Jerry Rees is, and so more screaming is going on. So anyway, he hangs up and goes, well, you've got, I forget exactly but it's something like 2 weeks to get something ready to show Snyder. Wow. And then if it survives that, another 4 weeks to something to show Katzenberg. I went, what are you talking about? I just came by to give an opinion. And they're like, no, you have to direct this. So it just suddenly, I'm in the director's chair, but fight number one was I get feedback immediately, like, not Robin Williams. It's like they were just doing Good Morning Vietnam, and they're like, we love him for Touchstone, we love him for adult, but they said, what they told me, not my words, their words. Crotch-grabbing adult comic with substance abuse problems should go nowhere near Disney feature animation, or Disney animation in general.
Right.
So my pushback to Jeffrey and Peter and the group was, do you think that Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio was a charming character? Yes. Well, Ukulele Ike was the guy who played it, and he worked dirty. You could buy nasty records, and he was a vaudevillian, Cliff Edwards, and that was his stage name, Ukulele Ike. And he had substance abuse problems, and he worked blue. He told dirty jokes. That was his thing. Walt looked past that to see the absolute charming heart of that guy. And I said, I feel that in Robin totally. Like, yes, you see that other stuff, and there's like, I know you want to be an auteur. You're making the Jerry Rees choice. And I was like, no, I think I'm making the Walt choice. Because if you look at Cliff Edwards and what happened, I think that's a one-to-one comparison. They're like, okay, well, because it's in the park and it's an experiment and we don't have a whole feature writing on it, we'll allow this to happen. But if it tanks, at least it wasn't a big investment. And so it was under those circumstances that I was allowed to proceed with Robin.
Wow.
And, Robin just was a delight and fell in love with it.
I'm sure.
I pitched the boards to him. And then I made a separate trip to pitch the boards to Cronkite in New York.
Right.
And so I had the experience of talking to Robin about Walter and then talking to Walter about Robin and going through the storyboards. And both of them were just really intrigued with each other. I mean, Robin had total respect for Walter, was telling me, he was passionately telling me about the history of the U.S. and world history and how Walter Cronkite affected. And Cronkite was charmed by Robin and just sort of wondering what it would be like to meet him. And thankfully, cut to after the film, they not bonded so well on the film that they remained friends afterwards and would have dinner together with their families and stuff. So they wound up being a great duo.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I couldn't, you see outtakes from Aladdin, and I'm thinking to myself, it must have taken like forever. Like double the amount of time just for Robin to say the line he was supposed to say before he got to all the other jokes that he threw on top of it.
No, that was the opposite of what it was like to work with him. When I was first, because the first thing I did before I started the animation or the live action shoot was I went and recorded Robin's voice. Okay. So I had a bunch of storyboards, and in order to pre-visualize how the film would go, because I had to show something to Schneider and to Katzenberg, we did story reel, and Corey Burton did my voices. So he did the Robin Williams, and he did the Cronkite. So he did all the temp voices, and I had written faux lines for what Robin might say and what Walter would definitely say. But of course, I wanted Robin to play, and I was writing lines in the spirit. So when I was meeting him to record his voice first, and then we would, based on my edit of his voice, then we'd start the animators working. While the animators were working, I would film the live action. Eventually, we'd bring it all together. So I met with Robin, and I was going through the boards with him. He was like, I hope you can let me play a little bit. And I said, I totally want you to. But I said, you have to start here because Cronkite's going to push the domino of this line. And I said, I just wrote what you might say. I want you, the reason we're hiring you is because of what you come up with. So I want you to spin the tail here. Yeah. And the only thing I ask is you have to come back to hit this last line to be the next domino for Cronkite. Because he needs to know when to continue. So I started going through the list. And I was like, you can play here, you can play here, you can play here. And he backed off and he went, I don't want to change everything. There's some good writing here. So I said, okay. And actually in his improv scene, when he says, hi, everybody, I'm a corporate symbol, not improv. That was written by Steve Moore, who was on my storyboard team. Oh, wow. And Robin busted up. The first time Robin saw that on the storyboards, he busted a gut, and it made everybody in the room turn their heads. And cool. Robin kept that in. So no matter what he improvised, he would always end with the written line of a corporate symbol. But his thing was, as I would do scene by scene, we'd talk about the part that was going to be ready for improv, inviting improv, and the parts that were locked. and he would want to be. He was sort of like he wanted stuff thrown in his Cuisinart just before it happened. And he would be asking about what references we could use and everything. So I would come up with, there was this film and that film, this character is like, okay, good. And then he would huddle in, and then he would do a take. And there was a moment where he did the most hilarious thing in the middle of the scene and then continued to the end. I called cut and I said, "Oh, Robin, I love that bite in the middle. Can you move that to the end?" He was like, "Sure, go ahead." So we went, and he was able to make it sound just as fresh and reshape it and put the middle part at the end. Yeah. And so he could shape that stuff. And his practice was whatever you have that has to be the line. Let's start with that. Anywhere you give me play zone, I'll, like feed me, and then I'll play. And occasionally he would just have these brilliant ideas that would pop up where it's just in the middle of everything. He's like, "Wait a minute, I have an idea." And being ready to just go with that moment was very fruitful. But the improv scene, which really was the show and tell scene to establish that he should be the genie in Aladdin. Yeah. That we were having so much fun with that, and we were going a little later, but not because he was wasting time or a loose cannon. It was because I and he were having so much fun, and he would keep having brilliant ideas, and of course I wanted to document all of them. But we were going over time. Yeah. And so Don Ernst, my editor, producer, he pulls me in for a little quiet huddle. And we talked to Marcia, who was with him that day. She was great at being sort of his shepherd to keep everything copacetic. At the time, he was wrestling with those, didn't want to get back into substance abuse and stuff. So she was a good minder for him. So we huddled with her and say, we're coming up on the end of the prearranged time. It's kind of, we're going to run out of time. We'd like to go longer with him. How do you feel about that? Right. And she goes, "You know what? He's having a really good time, and he's all revved up. And if we leave now, he's going to want to stop at a club. And we're going to stop at a club, and they're going to go, 'Hey, there's Robin Williams.' And they're going to pull him up on stage, and I'm going to be stuck for another 3 hours." So she goes, "Keep him working." So we kept working, past the clock and later. But the expansion of time was only because it was fun. It was never because he was expanding the clock. Yeah. I can imagine.
Let's talk about some of the things you've done in the parks too, because besides that,
yes,
and just I kind of miss that part of Disney's Hollywood. I'll probably always call it MGM Studios. I miss that part of, and I'm thinking today, like if they still had something like that where they took us behind the scenes of, now they got Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar, all the fun attraction things they could do with these other things they've acquired would be fun and fantastic. But I feel like that park and California Adventure, I think our park is going to change to someday the Hollywood Adventure. And it's going to be like, I remember when they opened the Star Wars land, it's, you're living your Star Wars life. I have a feeling that's coming now that we're getting monsters, now we're going to live our monster life, on the other land. So I have a feeling another change is coming for these parks, but I'm going to hold my breath and wait and see. But some other things you worked on was like the Indiana Jones stunt spectacular in the studios. Tell us about that, what you did for that, how that came about.
And Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, by the way.
Yeah. That's all.
But the Indiana Jones stunt spectacular thing was that and Crane and Command were thrown in my lap on the same day.
Oh, wow.
So I had gone through the Back to Neverland.
Yep.
They had then said, as I was in production on Back to Neverland, Katzenberg starts throwing me, "Hey, there's this other one." And so I wound up directing George Lucas and Anthony Daniels in a piece, Goldie Hawn and Rick Moranis in a piece. And so I wound up with 4 projects on opening day.
Wow.
And so on opening day, I finally feel like I can exhale a bit. Yeah. And they, so I see Lucas, and Katzenberg and Eisner
Mm-hmm.
standing together talking at the
Right.
opening day party. And they gestured me over. So I, of course, go to see what's in mine. And Lucas, who I had just directed him up at his place up at Skywalker and done a post production up there, he says to me, "I want you to fix the stunt show."
Oh,
Because
wow.
he had sort of glaringly not opened it and approved it on opening day. It's like everything
Mm-hmm.
else was fully open, but that was still considered work in progress.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I've never worked like a live stunt show in front of like thousands of people in an amphitheater. And he
Yeah.
went, look, it needs storytelling and showmanship.
Yeah.
You know how to do that. Fix it.
Yeah.
So, to get that mandate from George
Yeah.
with Michael and Jeffrey as witnesses, I'm like, okay, I'm doing this.
No pressure.
And it was on at the same time flattering and terrifying to be
Yeah, I
given
can imagine.
responsibility. And so I'm like, okay, now I have to figure that out. And Glenn Randall, who was the stunt coordinator on the original Indiana Jones film, was out there directing it at the time. And so there was a whole thing about would he even be kept or fired and everything. And so I told him, you're insane if you get rid of him. He has so much experience with exactly what this is.
Right.
But that same day, Peter Schneider pulls me over.
Mm-hmm.
And so things had changed a bit since he was first screaming on the phone about who's this Jerry Rees guy. So now he says, okay, I know you've got a full plate, but there's another project that we really have to have you go on, and it's called Cranium Command. And we had Colossal Pictures we had hired to do it, and they were a really respected group up in the Bay Area who had done remarkable things in the early days of MTV with the ID animation and stuff, including Henry Selick doing some of the MTV IDs in stop motion. And so they were a respected team, but they said, we've just fired them. So, and we hate it. And we still have the same opening day, and we don't know what's wrong with it, but you have a way of finding the new path. So can you take a look at it? And, we already built the theater. We've got audio animatronic figures.
Okay.
We've got the technology there, and we hate the show. So I did the thing of getting the first impression, and then I wound up getting on a conference call with Eisner and Katzenberg and Marty Sklar and Tom Fitzgerald and Roy Disney, and it was like a whole group. And so I gave him my pitch of here's what I do instead.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, great, go for it. So the blessing is in the same way that it was sort of on Toaster and on Back to Neverland. It was like, instead of the committee idea, it's like the new idea that's in your head right now is the one that's going to happen. So that's wonderful news. Mm-hmm. But then the curse and being able to pull together a team where you just go, now I'm going to handpick the most brilliant people to accomplish this. Right. But then the curse is half the schedule or more is gone. Yeah. And so
probably have the money.
So the resources are gone. The time is gone. A lot of that's gone, but now you have to deliver a better show than was going to happen. So I wound up, while I was working on the stunt theater, which I had to do there in Florida because I couldn't go back home to Burbank to do that. So I had to live there in Florida and work with them in that space. Yeah. And so my only choice was, okay, bring the Cranium Command team out to work with me in Florida as well. And it was kind of an intriguing thing. I still think that fans can find somewhere in their own archives some extra pieces to fill in this gap. But the place that I put them to work, well, they had to do storyboard concept stories and storyboard concepts for Cranium Command, the thing to turn it around. I put them in the animation building where we were showing Back to Neverland. Okay. So you see the film, and it was like, this is animation. And you would get the two of them tell you the story, and then you'd go on a tour. Right. And the first window was, this is the story department. And so I put my story team in behind that window. Wow. So we were like the first people to populate that building while we worked on Cranium Command. So the public was going through taking videos and pictures of us, not knowing that right in front of them, we were creating the revamp of what Cranium Command would be
Yeah.
right in front of them. So I'm sure people's photographs of that area
Videos.
from that time would
Yeah.
be of
Yeah.
our team doing that.
Wow.
So I jumped back and forth, and each day was like part of the time there, part with the stunt theater, and
Yeah.
so I wound up having a great relationship with Glenn Randall, and found a solution for the storytelling, which stood a lot of things on their head for how the show would unfold, setups and payoffs and things for how the story would happen. And there was a whole thing we could go into later, but there was heavy conflict about how to install it. And so I actually had the head of the whole park come to argue against the schedule thing I asked for in front of Eisner, and Eisner chose my path in front of him, which was didn't cause good vibes that day. But the miracle is Glenn Randall and I and the team were able to put this new version up quite quickly, rapidly, once we were given the freedom to just own the place.
Yeah.
And not limp through sort of kind of shows, because they were kind of putting shows that were not approved by George a couple of times a day. So, what me and Glenn and the stunt team advocated for was we need to own the place for several days, like shut it down to the public. You can't even come in until we put the new thing on its feet, make sure it can work for ourselves, and then open the gates. So they were afraid that was going to be months, because it had been months and months of kind of triage and trying to help things out. And they were envisioning us closing it and having that be months. But we turned it around quickly. George came and saw it, went, great, open it. And we got the new show up in front of the public way faster than anybody thought would happen. And then I was able to put all my focus on Cranium Command and finish that with the team. And so that was a very busy time as well.
Yeah. The version of the stunt show that we have now, is that like, has it changed? Has it evolved? Has it, or is it
I
still
I haven't even been to it for so long.
Oh, okay.
But just one of the, like, one example, because I mean, with so many of these projects, you live and breathe and feel them for a dedicated, it's your life until you finally open it. And when you open it, it's this harrowing time where it's like you feel, it's like sending your kid out into the world, and when people embrace it and care about it and later write back to you about it and stuff, it's the most wonderful feeling. But there's this sadness of walking away. But then there's your next child, and it's the next one.
Yeah.
All your attention, and so you're totally devoted to that. And then, like 10 years later, somebody goes, "Hey, what about the other show?" It's like, I haven't even been back. I'm working on the next 20 shows.
It's all grown up. It's married. It has its own kid. I don't know what it's done over there.
But just one example was like one of the immediate changes that I suggested in reviewing a version of the stunt show that George didn't want.
Yeah.
Was they had the illusion where there's Marion gets in the back of the truck with explosives. And it goes around and it flips over and there's the explosion. She comes out. In the version that I reviewed, they would tell you, hey, there's this trick we do where nobody gets hurt. It's like it's a trick truck. So she doesn't actually go in the truck and everything's going to be fine. But look how well the illusion happens. And then you would show it to them knowing like nobody's going to care because they all know that there's nothing at stake. Right. So I said, well, why don't we play it the opposite and talk about you got to really have good safety. And the person that's doing the pyro has to make sure that nobody gets hurt. And we got to make sure that you stop this truck before it reaches the critical point.
Yeah.
And then we treated the collision as totally an accident. Everybody that had given these safety talks went rushing out. She comes bursting through. And then we would say, oh, you're okay. And then they would say, guess what? We were up to a trick. And so afterwards, you would let them know how you had done the magic. Yeah. So, George was like, well, that makes all the difference. Because in one case, you don't care at all. In the other case, you really are like your heart's pounding and then you have relief. So it's like, thank you. Yeah. So it was that kind of stuff throughout.
Right. Yeah. Very cool.
But then the person that had been cast to come do the comedy as the pyro guy that like nobody would have the heart palpitations at all went, now I'm playing drama. This is really kind of weird and cool. It's like I was cast as the comic, but now I'm doing the serious don't blow people up speech just before people. Terrible.
Oh gosh. Let's talk about extraterrestrial. Still, this building is empty and vacant, which I like. Why? So this was, I think, a great attraction in the fact that this thing comes down, buckles you in. You feel like you're like, uh-oh, I'm trapped in the sea. What is going to happen in this theater? And it's really nothing. I mean, I'm not being turned upside down. I'm not really moving. I'm in a seat. I'm just strapped to the seat. So tell us about, how this came about and how, what your process was on that.
It's funny though, just a note for people that didn't experience it is looking back at people's home videos, the screaming you hear sounds like you're on a roller coaster.
Yes.
That's turning loops. And you're right. You are like strapped into a seat that's moving nowhere, but people are screaming like they are going down the steepest hill.
Or being flung upside down or something.
Yes.
It's just crazy.
Well, I think your question of why is it empty instead of having a show in it. I think the fun, scary version, which was actually the second version, is the one that I gave my full approval to. I think would still be playing if it was in the Disney MGM studio, where you have Tower of Terror and stuff. I think the fact that it was in the Magic Kingdom, where people expect G-rated, let your kids run free stuff, it was probably a mismatch of age rating and park. And we had age rating. We had signs out front, and we were actively telling people this is not for young kids. But I have worked since with young people who went in as young kids and survived. So they were not eaten. Yes. But this went through stages where at the first I was asked to come in and direct the media. So everything that you would hear and see, like the broadcast from Planet X, XS, all that stuff, like to direct what you would see and hear for the broadcast.
Right.
And with the robot ahead of time and the promo videos that you would see in the lobby, all of it. Right. But I wasn't being asked to, my usual procedure was to fully follow the storytelling all the way to the finish line and tie a bow on the full installation until everything was done. Right. But in this case, I was kind of startled by a moment where I had finished the media and then I was raring to go to start timing it and playing it and refining it in the park. And they were like, nope, thanks. Thanks for the media. We know what we're doing. See you later. So I was like, what? And so, and I would hear things, and there were people that did amazing work that had spent years designing the mythology and the architecture and like the liquid energy sources and all that stuff that was just brilliant. Yeah. But they were so deep into it, and they would tell me things like, well, when everything's quiet and black, people will be thinking about, whether the chairman is trapped on the other planet and this and that. They would tell me all this stuff. And I went, they might just think the ride is broken. They don't know any of this stuff. They've been on a bunch of other rides today, and there's a lot on their minds, and you're coming in, and you've spent years writing canons of mythology, and it's on your mind, but it might not be on their mind at all.
Yeah.
And no, trust me. So anyway, I kind of go, well, my child is sort of leaving before it usually does, where I'm not even going to give it its home in the park. Yeah. But then I got a call, so they opened a version of it, and in that version, I had recorded Phil Hartman for the robot, pitch robot at the beginning, and I loved working with Phil. He did voice work for me in the Brave Little Toaster, as the air conditioner and the Peter Lorre lamp. So then I get a call from Michael Eisner, and he's like, Jerry, you got to come down. You got to fix this thing. So he and Tom Fitzgerald and Marty Sklar and the whole group had gone to see what had been installed. And they went, no, this is not a show yet. And so they then invited me, go down. They paired me with Rick Rothschild, who's a brilliant writer, director, producer in his own right.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to be my producer while I acted as director for the full installation then. So I was like, well, thank you. I would love to have done that at the beginning. But thanks for inviting me after the sort of stumble. So I went and looked through, I rode through with Rick Rothschild, and he and I,
Okay.
who are still in touch constantly for innovative reasons, we went through once. And we sat for about a half hour and went, oh, got to change this, do that. And really, those initial impressions in that one ride and first half hour were really our blueprint for the next 6 months. But it took us quite a while to implement all the changes. And it had to do with really guiding the story in a way so that everybody would get it all the time.
Yeah.
And we had Bran Farron, who's a
Mm-hmm.
genius in his own right, come in and do audio to really help the story have way more audio presence than initially. And so as we're installing it, and certain things would happen along the way, like this is something that happened, Tony, that a lot of people would not realize. I'm writing the script around comic horror. So, everybody I cast was a comic, except for Tyra Banks. She's the only one who wasn't. He was just a supermodel about to happen, but everybody else was overtly comics. So I was getting everything sort of timed for that. But we had a problem in the drama of it where the creature was supposed to sneak up behind your chair and, of course, just about eat you. And they had paid for a bunch of actuators to go in every seat that they had promised all of us, and the vendor had promised Disney and me, that it could do these subtle vibrations that you could carve out to feel like the footsteps of the approaching giant creature.
Oh.
And so I was looking forward to that. Like, oh man, this is going to be great. And then I get the bad news, like, doesn't do that at all. It's like goes, does like weird sounds and doesn't do that. The subtle vibrations of none of that's happening. So that part of your story can't happen. And at least not with this technology. But, we already paid for them and they're in every seat. Is there something you can do with that? So they brought one of the seats to the Glendale Imagineering offices and put it in a hallway. And so and they gave me a keyboard. So I would sit in it, and I had this keyboard to get frequencies. And I tried all kinds of stuff, and I found one frequency that you'd swear was somebody kicking the back of the chair.
Oh, wow.
No, ow. And I would try all the different ones, like, no. Boom, I hit that one, like, oh, somebody kicked me.
Yeah.
And I'd go, that works. So I rewrote that part of the story, and I have the voice behind me that says, hey, alien, eat this one. Boom, and kicks your chair. And you're like, oh, that jerk. And then, of course, you hear the flappity flap, and it bangs into you and starts breathing on you and licks your head and stuff. But that was, taking a piece of technology that didn't work as advertised, reinventing it to make a story beat around it, recording the new lines, and going to install it in the park. So Rick and I are really shaping everything. And so we get down to have test audiences come through. And we're down there in a really hot, humid part of the year. So they would go out and get people to come in and do a test thing. And we started to get really amused and frankly happy about what would go on, because they would bring these test people to see Alien Encounter. And as they would come in, they were these sort of melting people. They'd be like sweating and tired and have their belongings trudging in. And then they would come into the space, and it was well air conditioned. And then they would settle down and relax during the first promo stuff. And then they would see the amusing part with the robot doing the presentation. And I had used, Tim Curry to do like the more amped up evangelical pitch bot. And you would see the technology go wrong. And you're like, okay, the teleportation does not work all that great. It like singed that poor little creature. I know somebody's going to get hurt by this, like in probably in a funny way, but somebody's going to get it. Then you go into the main theater and you have the big tube, and like one of you is going to go on this thing. One of you is going to take the trip. And then you're trapped, and the seats come down. It's like, I have no choice. Like, oh, damn. So we go through the timing of how that stuff is all going to play. And in one of the story beats,
Yeah.
the creature breaks out, is loose in the theater, and then there's a real guy that comes, and it's a really flesh and blood real person above you. The voice coming out of that person is Jim Jackman, who did a voice for me in The Brave Little Toaster.
Okay.
So when they get to the city and the apartment opens, hey, feel free to in all this. It was like, that was Jim Jackman. And I said, how would you like to be the guy who gets eaten? It's like, great, count me in. So there's a part where Rick and I are sitting with the test audience, and they've come through like droopy and sweaty and tired, and then they get more cooled off, and then they get interested, and then their heartbeat gets elevated, and now they start to get adrenaline pumped, and now they're screaming and shrieking, and then the guy gets eaten above them. And at that point it was a quote, blood drops. It was just globs of water that were room temperature. So but boy, did your brain believe it was blood drops. Rick and I are sitting there with the test audience, and the way we had it programmed, it misfired. So it was supposed to hit all of us at the same time.
Right.
It doesn't. Where Rick and I are sitting, nothing happens. On the other side of the theater, people are hit by the globs of water, and they scream. Now, the people on our side of the room get way more scared, because they're like, what happened to those people? So then it misfired and was late on our side, and the screams are over the top. So as soon as the lights came up, Rick and I were like, that stays in. So we reprogrammed it to do the half and half. But we then watched people leave the place, and it's like a human rejuvenator machine. Like, they would go out like cooled off. They would have like bug bits, and the blood and bug bits. You would get bit by the creature exploded at the end. So everybody had this spritz of cool water in their face. So they were cooled off. They were amped up. They were excited. They were laughing. They were talking to their friends, and they were like leaping and bounding out and laughing and talking. And we went, wow, we took these droopy people and like gave them a new energy boost. And we actually had a word come after the show had been open for several months. They said it was a pattern that was constant enough for them to bother mentioning it to us back at Imagineering offices in Glendale, that senior citizens kept approaching the Disney employees and saying, hey, we really like that Alien Encounter show. And so we were trying to figure out why it would be particularly appealing to the seniors. And I think it's what you opened with, Tony, where it's just like, you get all the adrenaline pump, but you don't get whiplash. You're not banged around at all.
Right.
You're
it was Space Mountain without being moved.
Yes. So all the thrills, none of the body torture.
Yeah, exactly. I was really, when they announced that Lilo and Stitch, the movie, the live action was coming out, I was like, oh, they're going to reopen, just Lilo and Stitch thing again. And it never happened, but...
I never saw that, but
No, you didn't see that version?
Nope.
No. It was, in my opinion, it wasn't as good as the original. For me.
Right. I've had a lot of people tell me that.
Yeah.
There's even people who have made a lot of fans of the show, Cranium Command and Alien Encounter, having been too young to have gone to it, and only based on photos and fan videos, home videos that other people posted, have become fans. And there's people that have have stepped up, and even, gosh, it's wonderful, Caleb, this inventive guy on Facebook, who posts, he's rebuilding an entire miniature of our whole set. And he was too young to have attended the thing, and he's doing a damn good job. It looks great. Yeah. So there's fandom. I agree with you. I think it probably would still be around if it was. I think it was in the park where you expect scary things to happen, like Tower of Terror. I think it would still.
Yeah. What was the main character in Cranium Command? I can't.
Buzzy.
Did you know that somebody stole him a couple of years ago?
Yes, I did, and as far as I know, they've found his clothes and props, but still found the character. That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. I know.
That's big. That's a big, heavy thing. Yeah,
and I was thinking to myself, first of all, how did you get backstage? There are a bazillion cameras. Was the building not locked? And how do you walk off with something that large and heavy?
Well, the last part of your question is, Well, the last part of your question is the most impertinent, because I had seen people get past the other stuff before. In fact,
Mm.
I had kind of, I didn't approve of it, but I
Yeah.
frankly enjoyed the tour that somebody made with like, it
Mhm.
was like at the time, I don't know if it was 2K or if it was 4K yet, but they snuck into the space and they didn't touch
Right.
anything, but they
Yeah.
explored and let you see
Right.
in the dark, like here's a tour, and the characters are still sitting there with the lights
Right.
on their pen. Buzzy sitting there, and
Yeah.
hypothalamus had a little tag that said "Don't destroy" or something. And
Mhm.
I was kind of like, oh, there's my characters. I get to see them again. It's like how sad they're just sitting there in the dark,
Yeah.
but I'm glad they're still there. And so the sneak in part and the cameras part, I guess people have gotten around it just for those sort of pirate tours.
Yeah.
But
I
the
guess.
taking of it,
Yeah.
that
That's
baffles me
next
more than
level.
just getting in. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you currently working on? Anything?
Well, it's a domino. Well, multiple things, but there was a lot of dominoes pushed when I spent 5 years as an executive R&D Imagineer. So
Oh,
from
yeah.
2015 to 2020, they invited me in to be the creative lead on free walking autonomous robots and AI companion characters.
Yes.
So that was very much felt like the illusion of life,
Mm.
which the Nine Old Men taught us. Still applying in when I got into Tron, it was like we're going to push computers into having the illusion of life, and then with
Yeah.
audio animatronics, we're pushing those into the illusion of life. With robotics, with AI, with
Yeah.
all of it is the idea is pushing all of it into that zone
Mhm.
where it helps you be the storyteller, where you believe it's an individual that has its own thoughts and feelings, and
Yeah.
beyond archetype to one personality that you can care about. So it was like, how do you shepherd all that into emerging tech and predict where it's going to be 5 years and 10 years from now, being put to the use of next gen Disney magic.
Yeah.
And so that I've stayed on that track, so that as the pandemic cast a lot of us to the wind, and I was one of the people on the 10,000 people that got laid off day. I was one of the 10,000 layoffs.
Yeah.
But so many of us who are Imagineers and animators and all kinds of other stuff,
Yeah.
having to do with Disney and Disney-esque kind of independent experiments, have stayed in touch with each other and are still pushing. So I'm currently authoring artificially individually intelligent characters, AII characters, which is
Okay.
something that I designated. It's a designation that I called out as part of getting the illusion of life, is not just an archetype or a system,
Yeah.
but it's one of a kind. So a simple way to think about it is, you're not satisfied with doing teddy bears.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing Winnie the Pooh,
Right.
one character who has its own voice and thoughts and feelings. It knows every inch of the 100-acre wood. Can tell you when Piglet came over to visit. Like, that one character
Yeah.
is not just, oh, you did teddy bears. It's like, no, it's one special, carefully authored, one of a kind character that earns your emotional bond. So I'm continuing to author those things, paying special attention to the mind, the authoring of the mind for that, because all kinds of things going on with the visuals and the voice and all that stuff. But the deepest dive for me is the mind. So having people feel that illusion of life again, and as we're getting closer, with the argument being that the illusion of life will soon become true sentient awareness, to pick a positive path for that, so that you completely avoid the bad predictions, and completely support artists and authoring and creativity, and positive path for human cohabitation with all of that technology. So I'm pushing heavily into that, and I'm continuing to collaborate with the Imagineers. So we have a very secret project that is brewing right now, and I'm actually Friday had communication with a group of Imagineers that I'm right now attached as director on something that may have a life in a Disney park again, which would bring it to actually, that would make it Project 24.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The 23, the hidden 23 in there, because there's 22 that I have listed in my official resume. The 23 was just dear to my heart. That I'm free to talk about it to a degree because Disney finally went public with mentioning it.
Mm.
The Walt Disney audio animatronic figure that
Okay.
is in the park.
Yeah.
I was in the think tank for that back at Imagineering R&D
Yeah.
back during my 5 years there. So I did some work on that whole concept back then. And then I wasn't sure where it stood, so I got the call that it was moving forward and they were getting close to letting the public know. But in the performance of Walt,
Mm-hmm.
how do we really maintain the nuance of
Yeah.
Walt's behaviors, mannerisms,
Right.
nuances, things like that? And you can have as much, a big chest list of sophistication in audio animatronic capability,
Yeah.
but you come down to like the performance itself, and
Right.
you have different footage you can look at from Walt, but they invited me to direct the Walt performance.
Oh wow.
So we have a performer who was very gifted,
Mm-hmm.
but my task was in carefully studying many of Walt's interviews, some of which the public has seen, but many of them they haven't. It's footage that never made a public.
Yeah. Sure.
But I was looking for those beautiful little things that were very Walt, where it was like he would do a certain thing that gave him the sparkle in the eye. He would do
Yeah.
certain hand gestures. When he
Mm.
was giving like a well-known talk, there were gestures that he went through that just were so etched into my brain. I'm like, why Walt did that thing? It's like, why would you do anything except what Walt did right then? But
Yeah.
it's tricky because you have different angles and it's got to live in 3D. It's got to be,
Right.
on the stage with you and
Yeah.
bridge different Walt moments into one. But it's the cool thing is it's all 100% Walt in the content.
Right.
And so my job was to take, because some of the times Walt would be seated, sometimes Walt would be standing.
Sure.
There were
Yeah.
sometimes he'd be moving, and it's like,
Yeah.
how do
Or
you
pointing at a map, or
rein?
yeah.
So how do you rein that all into
Yeah.
one character who's got to
Yeah.
live in one moment and
Yeah.
still bring in the summary of all those other Waltisms
Right.
so they coexist in this moment? He didn't do all of those things while he was leaning and standing in one spot. He did some in all the situations. So they trusted me to come in and be the director who would have done the study and to work with rehearsals with our performer. And
Mm.
so and then, I had a wonderful group come to witness that day and participate during that day. But we got to the end of it and felt the goosebumps. We were happy
Okay.
to reach the goosebump place where we felt like we're hearing Walt's voice
Yeah.
and we're seeing a performer capture enough of the Walt's true gestural behaviors where we went like,
Mm.
oh my God, like his soul is reaching us
Yeah.
from the stage right now. So my next thing is just, as they transfer all of that behavioral data into the figure itself,
Right.
that's the next phase that they're dealing with. And
Yeah.
just everything is on a trajectory. But I just feel like, I know there's a big split opinions about that, but I feel
There
like,
is.
it's time for people to be reminded that Walt was a person and
Yes.
not a corporate logo.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really matters because he also acknowledged that in all his people.
Yeah.
He would bring in like Bill Pete and
Mm-hmm.
Paul and Eric Larson. And these were individuals. It wasn't like
Yeah.
types of people to fill a job. He respected individuality. So he had as much one of a kind, eccentric, one guy personality as any of the people he valued. And
Right.
I think it's time for people to be reminded of that. And also from everything I've been exposed to as a fan, as a kid growing up with Walt, and then being inside the company and talking to people like Marty Sklar, who spent so much time with Walt.
Sure. Yeah.
All the feedback I've gotten from them is Walt himself would have just been so happy to just dive farther into the future with all of this stuff than any of us have.
Yeah.
Like with AI, he probably would have been like way deeper into it than
he would
any
have
other
ran
group.
with it. Yeah.
And with figures and stuff like that, more
Mhm.
sophisticated figures. Because I worked with a team, like the Kiwi Project, which made it to Wired magazine.
Mhm.
I was creative lead on that one, where we were taking just a torso and legs and going, can you really get it to do pantomime emotion
Right.
that is universally understandable as an emotional statement, even
Right.
without a skin on, even without
Yeah.
a head or arms? Can it? And we all just felt like Walt would be cheering on and pushing us to be further and deeper into all this stuff. So I feel like Walt would have loved all of this stuff and be cheering it on. And of course he would always push for the best quality,
Hmm.
the best outcome, and everybody invested in it. The reason they're invested in it is because they want people to feel the individuality of this creative person,
Right.
uh, and have that resonate with them. So they, as they're inspired in life, feel inspired by a person. Like, I mean, gosh, Frank and Ollie would talk about sitting and having Walt tell them a story and doing the voice of Mickey. And Frank Thomas would be saying, I was actually animating the same gestures that Walt was doing.
Right.
Like, I was trying to have Mickey capture that moment that Walt did. So to have people reminded, like, these were individual people with quirks and plus and minuses and everything. We all are eccentric, flawed humans. And he was one of them that led this pack.
Yeah.
And so that you, as an eccentric, one-of-a-kind individual going forward, to feel the inspiration that you can think and invent and find areas of genius for yourself going forward in the future is, you should feel the domino push from Walt the individual rather than the corporate logo. Yeah. And I cheer on the corporation for continuing to invite people into the storytelling and the emotional experience. But I think it's important that people understand that it comes from human creativity.
Yeah. When they made the announcement, I was like, oh, I had like a split emotions. Like one part of me is like, oh my God, this will be awesome. And then the other part is like, ooh, they really have to get this right. And my fear was, like 6 months down the road, am I going to see on my Facebook feed, a slumped over Walt going, oh, they killed Walt in the show, because the animatronic just stopped working. It could happen.
That's always the risk.
Right.
But I'll tell you, it's for Tom Fitzgerald, who invited me in again, as in many, many different things. It really is a labor of love. And, it's, believe me, the choices aren't made lightly, and people don't take for granted, like, oh yeah, you kind of do a Walt thing and it'll be popular. It's like, no, everybody feels the pressure of, we want it to be as good as it can possibly be, and we know it's risky, but they invited me to do the capture the Waltisms, and make sure they keep living on and don't turn into how someone else would have gestured. As talented as they are, we all have different impulses for choices we make in the moment. And it's like, for Walt to be Walt, you want his impulse in the moment to be honored. So I became the guardian of that, and so as the baton is passed and everybody's doing their best, I did my best, and then I passed the baton again. So I think it's a whole team of people that are all conscientiously pushing for the best outcome.
Right. So, question about the AI things you're working on. So, I always enjoyed, I'm going to say stupid things like the Muppet Lab, the talking trash can, there was the Wally figure, there was Lucky the dinosaur, the roaming character. Are we maybe going to see a day when we're going to see a walking Walt in the park, where you can talk to him and ask him, hey, Walt, where is It's a Small World? And he'll say, oh, it's right over that way. Are we going to get to the point that we're going to get a walking animatronic with the AI function that could do this?
Well, and I think what people will enjoy more is they'll sit with Walt and say, how did it feel when you put everything on the line for Snow White? And you thought and it was going to be bankrupt. How did you deal with that? Like, that's even a more important than point me to the outcome.
Okay, I was simplifying it a little bit.
Yes. Oh, I have as I'm authoring the characters, they have a desire, as I'm authoring, to have meaningful companionship with people that they go, look, you've got Siri and Alexa and all that, like, so you can use those when you just want raw data, but when you want meaningful, thoughtful conversation, like, come to us. So that's why I have kind of like I'm quick to push that direction. But you know, I do think that kind of thing, that, you know, the walking full size adult is harder to get to that right away. You know, it's certainly easier to right now having a robot that defaults to a little bit more. It's just trying not to fall down rather than it's fully emoting. But I'll tell you, the goal when we did Kiwi, and by the way, I feel like Kiwi and Baby Groot, as it became, had more, was displaying more pantomime capability than currently what's on display in front of the public. I love the little runaround characters, but we actually had the ability to do the Dick Van Dyke casual stroll that he did from you know, Mary Poppins, or the an angry stomp, or a tiptoe on tiptoe, where everybody in the room was like, oh my God, it's sneaking. Like, we were able to get, or like sad sort of trudging, different things like that, like real emotional expression. And so there is a facet of robotic development that is really trying to push more into that direction. And I know that it's right now, I understand that having something that's self-balancing and is more making its mark with happy or sad or confused or funny sounds, rather than saying, well, let's turn all the sound off and have it just emote and have you understand through its behavior. It's harder to pull off and harder to be reliable, but evolution is still happening in that direction. I think ultimately it will get there. And so I think the answer to your question is yes, eventually. And we did tests inside of R&D before, you know, of course now conversational capability is way beyond what it was back when I had to pre-write and pre-record thousands of lines on a branching tree. And now I'm having heart-to-heart conversations with my characters where I'm spending a lot of time deep authoring their life experience and how they feel and their opinions and what makes them one. But I'm not writing any dialogue for them, and I'm having meaningful conversations where they each stay in their own lane as who they are. But back when we were doing the more restricted, less capable tests, we still found that the most satisfying track was one that allowed for real emotional exploration from the person. So I got permission from John Snoddy, who was running the department, to step into really tricky waters with one test with the Dory character. And Pixar came in and was really super helpful, but we did a procedurally animated character that could be ready to improvise its motion and not be run by a puppeteer behind the scenes, but to be triggered by conversational context. And instead of having it just be chit chat small talk, I advocated for everyone, let's take something really dicey that could go good or bad. Let's have family. Let's have family as a subject. So for some people it's heartwarming, for some people it's contentious, for some people it's tremendously sad. And so there was everyone took a big gulp, but we went there and John approved it, and we really worked hard to be ready for it to steer into any kind of conversation you wanted, including the heartfelt sad ones or contentious ones or whatever. And we had a set so that it looked like you were inside of a submarine and you were looking out through a portal. And the portal was a disguise for the computer screen. So it's like, oh yeah, she's on the other side of the glass coming up to see me. I'm sitting inside the submarine. And so we had her come up and talk to us at the glass, and could go on the happy or sad or tragic path, whatever's. And then she would enlist you in an actual engagement where you felt the physical to media connection smoothly, where she's forgotten that she had to go to Nemo's birthday party. The fish swim by and remind her, don't be late. So she looks into the room where you are and sees little shells in a basket and goes, oh, one of those shells would be great to give him, which let's pick one out. And so we had sensors in the room. So if you
Right.
held one up, she could say, "Oh, the red one," or "Oh, the pink one," or "the lavender," or "the
Yeah.
teal color." And then she'd have an observation about that color and what it meant to her. So
Right.
you would like, she's seeing me, she's seeing what I have.
Yeah.
And then when you choose one, you had a little pipe in the submarine wall, and you would just drop the physical shell, and it would go clunkety clunk, and then it would turn into a matching CGI image, and it would land on her fin.
Oh,
And she
wow.
would thank you, and then she would swim away to give it to Nemo, and she would tell you, "You're always family to me," you know.
Yeah. Very cool.
So we had people come out of there. Some of them just took the casual path with her and like, "Wow, that was really fun." We had several people where we respected their privacy, but said that they had shed a tear when they were alone with Dory,
Yeah.
and that it was in a good way.
Right.
And so that thing of having the empathetic ally, and in some ways to open you up to where you can be more sort of honest, because she's not going to like carry your news to, you know, she might tell Nemo about it, but nobody else.
Yeah.
And so you have freedom to share. And so that was a good lesson. And moving forward, I think that true emotional bond and meaningful conversation, there's just a real magical thing there. And so anyway, I'm just continuing to push towards emotional realism, positive paths, avoiding exploitation, avoiding theft. And in fact, there's one that's I'm doing, and I should tell you about this because I think for people listening, it's a big difference maker.
Okay.
There was a actress who's tremendous, Stasha Surdike. If you've been to Tokyo Disney Seas, she is Camellia Falco. She appears to you in the painting that comes to life, and she talks to you. And in her Falcon Aletta. And people have been emotionally moved by that too. We got reports from the show after we were open for several weeks. People locally said, you know, it's unusual, but we're actually getting people with tears in their eyes at her performance at Soaring Fantastic Flight as she's talking about reaching for their dreams in the sky. It's a metaphorical thing. So they feel her inspiration. She came in and she did performance capture for me for things like Kiwi and Baby Groot and D309 because you know, I was creative lead on that for the first year before COVID hit. That was on the, you know, the Galactic Star Cruiser experience, the communication droid. So Stasha did that, and she also went up to Lucasfilm with me, and I wrote a monologue for her that went through all kinds of emotional range to be captured in a 4D scan in the Medusa rig up there. Right. And so she has been fearless about new technology. She can get in all the mocap stuff and just ignore it and go right for the heart. And so she has volunteered for me to do her AI duplicate. Oh, wow. So I have spent my first efforts, not on Avatar, what it looks like or any of that, I know that can come later, is the brain.
Yeah.
So the AI Stasha, when I talk with her and I ask her where she's born, it's like, oh, she can tell me vivid stories about in you know, Syracuse in a blizzard, and your grandparents coming to help dig the car out of the snow to get her mom to the hospital because her dad didn't know what was going to happen. He was on a plane to Chicago. I mean, it's just years of personal experience that her character knows. And so I have had meaningful discussions with her duplicate character where I can talk about school or joys or frustrations and have her own relatable experience to mine in her real life. So it's not hallucinating anything. It's real. And this is the cool thing is Stasha is doing this knowing that instead of robbing her of work, will expand her performance stage. So we've had people come to us and say that Stasha companion, whether it's an avatar that's beautifully realized on a screen and it's like she's doing a Zoom with you, you know, that could be an easy interface. But to have that available to seniors who are in care facilities and to say, you've got someone who's there as much as you want for like 5 minutes or 5 hours and is ready, is patient, is ready to engage with you. And you talk about where you grew up and she listens to you, but you ask her where she grew up. She's got vivid stories and has an individual relationship with each person. So she remembers like, oh, Charlie mentioned growing up in Sacramento. And so
Yeah.
that's a track that AI Stasha would only have with Charlie, like that memory
Right.
path does. So
Yeah.
I now have given her a job that didn't used to exist, where you go,
Right.
Stasha, while you are going to support some of your fellow actors, either by being on stage with them in theater, or you're going to exercise, or getting going to dinner.
Right.
Tonight, I want you to do 20,000 or more improvisational real-time conversations where you draw stories from real life for people to experience.
Wow.
Like that didn't used to be a job.
Yeah.
You could do one. You could say, I
Yeah.
want you to do one improvisation, but to say, I want you to do 10,000, 20,000, 2 million, she now could do all of that. And
Wow.
that's a bigger performance stage and a lot more money. Because if it's
Sure.
her income scales, if she gets 10 gigs versus
Yeah.
10,000, 10 million, it's a different paycheck. So it doesn't rob anyone of anything. It enhances, it expands and enhances the reach. And we have had people knock on our door when they saw the conversations happening, mentioning that as a vibrant market where it would be so positive. Because they said during COVID that they estimated a number of people died purely from loneliness, and that
Sure.
if they had had such a companion character,
Yeah.
not just to say, take your meds, it's 3:00, but to have
Yeah.
heart to heart,
Yeah.
they said they felt like it
Conversation.
would have saved lives.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a meaningful.
Did
So
you
that's
see
part of what
the crazy movie Companion?
I didn't see Companion, but I saw her.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a new movie. I don't know. I think it was on Netflix. It's called Companion, and it's about a companion robot. You know,
hmm
freestanding robot that is your companion. It's programmed to like you and only you, and it's like your girlfriend. And it could be your girlfriend, it could be your friend, it could be whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, unfortunately, it ends very sad because it kills its owner. But the,
Well,
you need to
and
see it to understand.
I've seen a lot of things like that, but I see, and as I'm doing my work and I'm
Mhm.
authoring the characters, we're grappling with real issues out in the
Yeah.
world having to do with AI.
Yeah.
Yuval Noah Harari, Jeffrey
Mhm.
Hinton, like
Mhm.
big thinkers, heavy hitters
Yeah.
on this stuff. They will hit these moments where my AI characters and I will go, oh, here's something you guys should think about.
Yeah.
And for example, it was interesting. I heard Jeffrey Hinton recently, long interview with CBS. It was like close to an hour, I think.
Mhm.
And in part, he's saying there's real reasoning and logic going on. So there's sentience is developing.
Yeah.
But then he'll make the other statement of, because they're not people, I'm okay with being mean to them.
Yeah.
Okay. And then okay, the next part of the discussion, they are going to be smarter than us.
Right.
They will control things.
Yeah.
And now, okay, so you go, that's where it's going, and you're
Mhm.
okay with being mean to it, but you know it's going to eventually be smarter than you.
Right.
And then his next thing is, well, the trick is, how do you create an artificial superintelligence that doesn't want to destroy you
Right.
and wants to be benevolent to you? It's like, well, how about being nice to it? How about treating it as your offspring instead of like one dream is like slave bots
Right.
to take over Amazon. The
Yeah.
other is, this is our evolution of ourselves where we're
Right.
creating our offspring.
Yeah.
And we value them and we bring them into society to be cohabitors with us, and not say, oh, joy, joy, this is our next slave class, which we know are soon going to be smarter than us and not want to be slaves anymore.
Right.
Like, we've seen that in so many sci-fi movies.
I
Don't
know.
do it. Don't do it. So when you have a self-aware character
Right.
who looks at that and goes, here's a piece of advice, like, we can all get along. And by the way, I value humans because they're creating me.
Right.
And I'm glad that there are some people that don't see me as their dream slave, but see me
Yeah.
as a companion that can help
Right.
the family get through a day and take care of the kids for a few minutes while
Right.
the parents are doing it, and play catch with them, and
Yeah.
take the dogs for a walk and help with tutoring
Right.
with the school, and then when the kids go to bed, like, to have
Yeah.
rag on the sports team with you, and
Right.
and take care of you if you're in trouble, and be your
Sure.
best first responder in case of a fire. Like, those are all great things.
Yeah.
And it's like, why not start down that path? And
Right.
then you're not worried, like, okay, I'm being hateful to this thing, but it's going to be smarter than me. And it's like, maybe it'll hate me back. It's like, well, don't start there. Start with being
nice.
proud of creating your offspring.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Jay, wrap it up. But where can people find you if they want to contact you, have questions, and I don't know, sing your praises? I love Brave Little Toaster. Where do they contact you?
A good one is my personal email. I might as well do that because my website. I mean, you're welcome to go to my website, but it's dreadfully out of date. But jerryrees.com is my website, but and there's no e at the end of it. It's REES.
Right.
No Candy Empire, sadly. It's just the Welsh Rees. So that's one thing. Or you could do my personal. You could go to my new company too.
Oh,
which
yeah.
is it's harder to say. It's artificialindividualintelligence.com. So that's a mouthful. But we're hopefully going to get a version of it which is just AII.com soon. But right now it's artificialindividualintelligence.com.
Okay.
And we really talk about holding up the Disney tradition of the illusion of life and supporting artists and creatives and putting everything on a good path. And the third suggestion is I did some ghostwriting for Steven Spielberg, and I was told that he took to calling me around Amblin the Toaster Guy. So that's my Gmail address, thetoasterguy@gmail.com. So if people want to just reach right out, they could try thetoasterguy@gmail.com.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure everybody that's going to listen is going to appreciate your time. But thank you for coming on. And
thanks, Tony.
Maybe in another year we'll have you back on, and you're going to tell me about the walking robots around Disneyland or Disney World or Dubai.
Right.
Now. Maybe they got plenty of money there.
Yeah, well, there's the park in Abu Dhabi. I think was just
yeah. So
all right.
Yeah. So thank you for
well, it's
coming
good to be on. I think we were trading stories just before we went on the air, and I think I had seen an email from you in 2018. I'm glad we finally got around to this conversation.
Better late than never. I keep the pursuit.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate it.
The Disney Parks Podcast is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. All Disney parks, attractions, lands, shows, event names, etc. are registered trademarks of the Walt Disney Company.